Welcome to the Greg's Review Show. Today we're going to get into a very uh, tragic video. Thumbs up, like and share this video. This is some crazy stuff. Please help support us through Cash App. That's GRC $mantrap. All your donations would be greatly appreciated. We thank you again for choosing Greg's Review Show. And without further ado, we're going to get into this sad situation. I don't know how it happened, but without further ado, let's get into it, and I'll be right back.
Known for his ambition and strong work ethic, Miles had quickly risen through the ranks, impressing both his peers and superiors. His dedication to the job was unquestionable, and many within the department believed he had a bright future ahead of him. Yet, despite the career accomplishments, Miles felt a lingering sense of incompleteness in his personal life. He had dedicated so much of himself to his career that the idea of settling down always seemed like a distant prospect. This all changed one night in the summer of 2014 when Miles attended a city gala, a networking event filled with local politicians, business figures, and other public servants. Among the crowd, he met Tasha Simmons, a 32-year-old event planner. Tasha had built her career from the ground up, becoming one of the most sought-after event coordinators in the city. She had the kind of confidence that was hard to ignore, and her poised, charming demeanor made her stand out in any room. From the moment Miles saw her, he was captivated. They exchanged a few words, which quickly turned into a longer conversation. By the end of the night, Miles knew he had met someone special. In the weeks that followed, their relationship blossomed. Tasha, with her vibrant personality, brought a sense of excitement and energy into Miles' otherwise structured life. They began spending nearly every evening together, whether dining at Detroit's top restaurants or sharing quiet nights in Tasha's downtown apartment. Their connection felt easy and natural. It wasn't long before Miles found himself thinking about a future with Tasha, a future that seemed brighter with her by his side. By early 2015, the couple had taken the next step and moved in together. Their relationship had become the talk of their friends and families. Miles' colleagues at the police department remarked on how happy and relaxed he seemed, while Tasha's friends admired the stability and dependability Miles brought into her life. Their whirlwind romance had all the elements of a perfect love story. In June of that year, just 6 months after they first met, Miles proposed to Tasha during a sunset walk on Belle Isle, Detroit's beloved island park. With the skyline of the city in the background, Tasha said yes, and their engagement was announced shortly after. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair held later that year in the fall. Only close friends and family were invited, and the ceremony took place in an elegant downtown venue. The celebration was understated yet elegant, reflecting both Miles' reserved nature and Tasha's professional touch. From the outside, they appeared to be the ideal couple, successful, in love, and poised for a bright future together. Tasha continued with her thriving event planning career, while Miles was on track for a promotion within the police force. However, behind the surface of their seemingly flawless marriage, small signs of strain were beginning to emerge. These signs were subtle at first. Tasha occasionally appeared distant, and there were moments when her vibrant personality seemed dimmed by stress. Miles noticed these changes, but chose not to press her, attributing them to the pressures of work or the natural ebbs and flows of a new marriage. After all, they had only been married a few months. He trusted that things would settle down and that their life together would smooth out in time. In the months following their wedding in the fall of 2015, things between Miles and Tasha began to change. At first, the shifts in Tasha's behavior were barely noticeable. It started with small, seemingly insignificant things. She would take phone calls in the other room, lowering her voice to a whisper when Miles was around. When he asked her who was calling, she would smile and brush it off, saying it was work-related, nothing important. Then there were the mood swings. Some days she was warm and affectionate, while other days she seemed distant, lost in her own thoughts. When Miles tried to comfort her or ask what was wrong, she would give a brief answer or change the subject. Miles, ever observant in his professional life, couldn't help but notice these changes. On the job, he had a sharp intuition, one that often helped him rid people and situations before they even unfolded. But at home, his love for Tasha clouded that instinct. He didn't want to believe that there was anything seriously wrong. He had married this woman only a few months earlier, and the idea that something might be off between them felt premature, even irrational. So, when she dismissed his concerns with a laugh or a kiss, Miles let it go. He convinced himself that it was just a natural adjustment period of marriage, that they would soon find their rhythm again. Tasha's phone calls grew more frequent, and her explanations for leaving the house became vaguer. She would mention late meetings with clients or last-minute emergencies that kept her out for hours. Sometimes, she would come home late at night, her face tense and her mood irritable. When Miles asked her what was wrong, she would give him the same vague answers. "Just work," she'd say. "It's been a long day." By midsummer of 2016, things had escalated to the point where Miles could no longer ignore them. Tasha was spending more and more time away from home, and her excuses were growing thinner. She often claimed to be meeting clients, but when Miles pressed for details, where the meetings were, who they were with, her responses were evasive. She seemed to be withdrawing from their relationship entirely, both emotionally and physically.
Mike Rogers backed 4 bills to ban abortion nationwide, including here in Michigan.
The intimacy that had once been a cornerstone of their connection was now sporadic, replaced by a growing distance that neither of them seemed able to bridge. Miles' mind began to race with possibilities. At first, he wondered if it was the stress of her career. As a successful event planner, Tasha was constantly under pressure to deliver for her clients, and he knew her job could be demanding. But this explanation didn't sit right with him. The tension between them felt more personal than professional. He started to question whether there might be someone else. The thought gnawed at him, though he hated to admit it. The idea that Tasha could be having an affair felt like a betrayal too terrible to face, but Miles couldn't shake the suspicion that something darker was at play. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Miles began paying closer attention to Tasha's behavior. He watched her more carefully, noting the time she left the house and the duration of her absences. He checked her phone when she wasn't looking, scrolling through her call history and text messages, but there was nothing that raised alarm. Yet, his gut told him there was more going on than she was letting on. The tension in their home grew thicker by the day, with every unanswered question deepening the chasm between them. Tasha, for her part, seemed to sense that Miles was becoming more suspicious, but instead of offering reassurance, she became more guarded. She would snap at him for asking too many questions, accusing him of not trusting her. The warmth and openness that had once defined their relationship were gone, replaced by an atmosphere of mistrust and frustration. By the end of summer 2016, the situation had reached a breaking point. Miles was certain that something was wrong, but he still didn't know what. His attempts to talk to Tasha were met with defensiveness or outright refusal. The woman he had fallen in love with, the confident, successful event planner who had charmed him at the city gala, seemed like a distant memory. In her place was someone he barely recognized, a woman whose secrets were slowly unraveling the life they had built together. By late August of 2016, the change in Tasha's demeanor was impossible to ignore. The once confident and self-assured woman Miles had fallen in love with was now visibly anxious. Her vibrant energy had been replaced by a nervous tension that lingered in every room she entered. She had become withdrawn, and her once lively presence felt distant. Miles could see it in her eyes, in the way she flinched at sudden sounds or clutched her phone a little too tightly. Something was weighing heavily on her, but every time he tried to ask, Tasha would deflect or evade, brushing his concerns aside with vague reassurances that everything was fine. But everything was far from fine. The reason for her growing anxiety soon became apparent. Marcus Dixon, a figure from Tasha's past, had resurfaced. Marcus wasn't just any acquaintance. He was someone who had known Tasha during a period of her life that she had long since tried to bury. Before she met Miles, before she had carefully crafted the successful, polished image of herself, Tasha had been involved in activities that she had kept hidden. Dangerous activities. Marcus, a small-time criminal with a history of petty thefts and extortion, had been part of that world. Tasha had worked hard to leave that part of her life behind. She had cut ties with the people who had once surrounded her and had built a new life, one that was clean and respectable. But Marcus had stumbled upon her secret, and he saw an opportunity. He had always been opportunistic, using whatever leverage he could find to extort money from those who had something to lose. And now, Tasha was in his crosshairs. He knew about her past, the things she had been involved in, and the lies she had told to create the life she had now. Armed with this knowledge, Marcus saw a way to make a quick profit. It began with a phone call. Tasha had been alone at home one evening when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something about it made her stomach twist in knots. When she answered, the voice on the other end of the line sent a cold shiver down her spine. It was Marcus. Calm and calculating, he wasted no time in getting to the point. He knew everything. He knew about her past, about the things she had done, and about the lies she had told Miles. And unless she paid him $50,000, he would expose it all. He would tell Miles everything, about her old life, about the secrets she had kept hidden for so long. Tasha was stunned, paralyzed by fear. She had worked so hard to distance herself from that world, to build a new life that was free from the mistakes of her past. And now, it was all unraveling. The price Marcus was asking for was impossible. She didn't have that kind of money. Event planning paid well, but not well enough to come up with $50,000 at a moment's notice. But Marcus didn't care. He wasn't interested in her excuses. If she didn't pay, he would ruin her. Desperate to keep her life intact, Tasha agreed to meet Marcus in secret. She couldn't risk telling Miles, not now. She couldn't bear the thought of him finding out about her past, about the person she had once been. So, she began scraping together whatever money she could. She siphoned money from her business accounts, took out small loans, and even dipped into her personal savings. But no matter how much she managed to gather, it was never enough. Marcus was relentless, showing up unannounced, demanding more, and threatening to expose her if she didn't comply. Each time they met, Tasha's anxiety grew worse.
With high inflation, working families like mine are hurting. And while we struggle, Kamala Harris supported
She would hand over whatever money she could gather, but it was never enough to satisfy Marcus. He always wanted more. And as the weeks went by, the pressure mounted. Tasha's financial situation was becoming dire. She was running out of options, and Marcus knew it. He thrived on the power he held over her, dangling the threat of exposure like a sword over her head. The meetings were always conducted in the shadows, dark parking lots, quiet side streets, anywhere they could avoid being seen. Tasha was terrified that someone would recognize her, that somehow Miles would find out. Every time she met with Marcus, she felt the walls closing in a little more. The weight of her secrets was crushing her, and she knew that she couldn't keep this up much longer. Despite her efforts, the stress began to take its toll. Tasha's once polished exterior began to crack under the strain. Her sleepless nights became more frequent, and her ability to maintain the facade of control was slipping. She knew she was living on borrowed time. Marcus's demands were growing more intense, and her financial resources were almost completely drained. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. By the fall of 2016, Tasha's erratic behavior had become impossible for Miles to ignore. Her once lively personality had been replaced by a jittery nervousness, and she often seemed distracted or distant. The small shifts in her behavior, which Miles had initially dismissed, had now become a regular part of their daily lives. She was frequently absent, providing vague explanations for her whereabouts, and her demeanor had shifted from loving wife to someone preoccupied with something she wasn't sharing. At first, Miles tried to rationalize the changes. He told himself that Tasha's business as an event planner was likely just more stressful than usual. Perhaps a particularly demanding client or a big project was taking up her time and energy. But as her absences grew more frequent, the excuses less believable, and the distance between them more palpable, Miles found himself unable to shake the feeling that something much deeper was wrong. His natural instincts, honed by years of police work, were telling him that Tasha was hiding something. In his mind, the most logical explanation was an affair. It was an idea he hated to entertain, but the clues were there, or at least, they appeared to be. The secretive phone calls, the late nights out, and the tension she carried with her whenever she returned home all pointed to the same conclusion. The thought gnawed at him, slowly eating away at the trust they had once shared. Every time Tasha would pull away from his touch or offer a vague explanation for her absence, Miles felt the grip of suspicion tighten. Determined to uncover the truth, Miles decided to take matters into his own hands. One evening, when Tasha said she was meeting a client after work, Miles followed her. He had never done anything like this before, but the growing paranoia left him with little choice. He needed to know what she was hiding, even if the truth destroyed him. That night, he trailed her car as she left their home. The drive was tense, every turn and stop heightening his anxiety. Tasha eventually pulled into a dimly lit parking lot on the outskirts of the city, an odd place for a professional meeting. Miles parked a short distance away, watching from the shadows as she stepped out of her car. His heart pounded as he saw her nervously glance around, checking to see if anyone was watching. A few minutes later, another car pulled into the lot, and a man got out. Miles couldn't make out his face clearly from the distance, but he saw enough. Tasha approached the man, and after a brief conversation, she handed him an envelope. The exchange was quick, tense. Tasha's posture was stiff, her expression one of apprehension. As the man walked away, she stood there for a moment, seemingly frozen, before quickly returning to her car. Miles sat in his car, stunned. The scene had played out like something from a bad movie, a clandestine meeting, an envelope exchanged in the shadows. To him, it was confirmation of his worst fear. Tasha was having an affair. The envelope, the secretive meetings, the tension, there was no other explanation that made sense to him at that moment. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, leaving him reeling. The woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had trusted with his life, was involved with someone else. The betrayal felt personal, cutting him deeply. He replayed the events of the past few months over and over in his head, searching for signs he had missed. Every unexplained absence, every moment of distance between them, now felt like evidence of her unfaithfulness. When Tasha returned home later that evening, Miles was waiting for her. His anger was barely contained as he confronted her, demanding to know the truth. "Who is he?" he asked, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and hurt. "What's going on? I saw you meet with that man tonight. What are you hiding?" Tasha's eyes widened, but she didn't react with the guilt or shame Miles had expected. Instead, she calmly told him it was a work matter, that the envelope was full of contracts and paperwork related to her event planning business. She said the man was a colleague, someone she had been working with on a difficult project. Her explanation was delivered with such confidence, it almost made Miles doubt what he had seen. But Miles couldn't shake the feeling that she was lying. Every word she spoke felt rehearsed, every answer too polished, too convenient. He had always trusted his instincts as a cop, and right now, those instincts were screaming that something wasn't right.
I get it. The cost of rent, groceries, and utilities is too high. So here's what we're going to do about it.
You've been lying to me. All this time. You've been hiding this from me, letting him blackmail you. Why didn't you tell me? Tasha, now visibly terrified, tried to explain, but her words were disjointed, her thoughts racing. She had wanted to protect him, she said. She had been afraid of losing him, of losing the life they had built together. But every explanation she offered only made things worse. The weight of her secrets, combined with the pressure from Marcus, had left her fragile, and now that everything was out in the open, she felt cornered and helpless. In a moment of blind fury, without fully realizing what he was doing, Miles struck Tasha. The force of the blow caught her off guard, and she stumbled backward. Before she could regain her balance, she tripped and fell, her head striking the sharp edge of the kitchen table. The sickening sound of the impact echoed through the room, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. Miles stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Tasha lay motionless on the floor, her body limp, blood beginning to pool beneath her head. The realization hit him all at once: he had gone too far. The anger that had consumed him had led to an irreversible act of violence. Panic surged through him as he rushed to her side, desperately trying to revive her. "Tasha," he called out, his voice trembling. "Tasha, wake up. Please." But it was too late. The weight of what he had done began to crush him. He had let his anger take control, and now the woman he loved, the woman he had vowed to protect, lay dead before him. Miles' mind raced with thoughts of disbelief, guilt, and horror. This wasn't supposed to happen. Without a clear plan, driven purely by fear and instinct, Miles grabbed his car keys and fled the house. He got into his car and sped away, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. He had no destination, no idea of what to do next. His only goal was to put distance between himself and the terrible crime he had just committed. As he drove aimlessly through the dark streets of Detroit, the city around him became a blur. Miles' mind was a storm of conflicting emotions: shock, guilt, terror, and disbelief. How had it come to this? How had a confrontation with Tasha, the woman he loved, spiraled so completely out of control? He had never intended to hurt her, but in a single moment of blind rage, everything had fallen apart. Now, all that was left was the aftermath of a tragedy that could never be undone. As he drove through the night, his phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. He knew the police would eventually come looking for him. He knew there was no way to escape the consequences of what had happened. But for now, all he could do was drive, the darkness outside matching the turmoil inside his mind. Meanwhile, Marcus Dixon, the man who had set the chain of events in motion, watched from a distance. He had been lurking in the background for months, manipulating Tasha with his blackmail and threats. When he learned of her death, he saw his opportunity to vanish, leaving behind the wreckage of her life. Marcus disappeared without a trace, taking with him the money Tasha had managed to scrape together and leaving Miles to face the consequences alone. The next morning, the tragic scene was discovered. A neighbor, concerned by the unusual silence from the house, knocked on the door, but there was no answer. When she peeked through a window and saw Tasha's body lying on the floor, she immediately called the police. The authorities arrived within minutes, and it didn't take long for them to piece together what had happened. Tasha's injuries, combined with the absence of her husband, pointed directly to Miles. It didn't take long for the investigation to lead back to him. His colleagues at the Detroit Police Department were shocked when the news spread Officer Miles Carter, a respected and up-and-coming officer, was now the prime suspect in a murder investigation. For days, Miles remained in hiding, driving through the city without any real plan or purpose. The weight of what he had done grew heavier with each passing hour, and he knew he couldn't run forever. He had to face what he had done. Finally, broken and exhausted, he turned himself in. He walked into a police station, pale and gaunt, and confessed to everything. The trial that followed became a national headline, with the media seizing on the tragic story of betrayal, secrets, and violence. Every detail of Miles and Tasha's life was scrutinized, dissected for public consumption. The prosecution portrayed Miles as a man consumed by jealousy and paranoia, painting a picture of premeditation in Tasha's death. They pointed to his growing suspicion of her behavior and the violent outcome as evidence of his intent. The courtroom was filled with tension as witnesses testified about the unraveling of Miles and Tasha's marriage. Tasha's past, the blackmail from Marcus, and the secrets she had kept all came to light, casting a shadow over the case. The public, too, was divided. Some sympathized with Miles, seeing him as a man driven to desperation, while others viewed him as a violent abuser who had taken an innocent life. In the end, the jury found Miles guilty of involuntary manslaughter. It was a devastating blow, but one that reflected the complex nature of the case.
Okay, YouTubers, as you can see, this video is definitely a heartbreaker thing. It scares me, and you never know what's out there. You got to be very careful who you meet out there. As you can see, Miles was very deceived through the marriage. This person never revealed who they were, that they were transgender, and unfortunately, the situation went wrong. So that's terrible that it had to happen like that. So all I'm saying to YouTubers out there, be who you are. Please don't deceive people. If that's what you are, that's what you do, that's your business. But be honest with that person. Let that person be able to make a good sound decision what they want to do. Never lie to these people. Be upfront and be honest with them. It's the best thing that I can say. So without further ado, that's it. Thumbs up, like and share this video. Please help support us through Cash App. That's GRC $mantrap. I'll greatly appreciate any donation, small or great, will be greatly appreciated. And again, thank you for choosing the Greg's Review Show. God bless you, and you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye bye.